Okay, so Odell Beckham Jr. signs with the Los Angeles Rams, and I want to put some fair warnings out here. Okay, let me just give y'all my stance on Odell Beckham Jr. on the whole. Y'all know with Odell, this is a player that, yes, I've been a pretty big fan of for a pretty long time now. I mean, with Odell Beckham Jr., this was a wide receiver that came out of LSU back in that 2014 draft class. If y'all know anything about me, I fell in love with Dynasty Fantasy Football back in 2014. I mean, that offseason, whenever we were evaluating players like Sammy Watkins, Mike Evans, Brandon Cooks, Allen Robinson, Jordan Matthews, Odell Beckham Jr., all coming into the NFL. Like, trust me, Odell is one of the main reasons that I fell in love with Dynasty Fantasy Football. So, I mean, you see that he is the intro to the channel. We have the little Odell Beckham Jr. catch animation. Like, Odell, I want to put it out there. Yes, I am a big fan of Odell Beckham Jr. At least I have been for a long time now. And going up into him signing with the Los Angeles Rams, I've been saying the second that Odell Beckham Jr. signs, we are going to be selling Odell Beckham Jr. in a package for almost whatever we could get. So that's kind of where we have stood on Odell for now. Now, the fact that he goes to the Rams, we'll dive into this fit. We'll dive into what it means with Cooper Kupp, what it means with Robert Woods, and exactly what we should be doing with these players. But of course, go down there, drop that like, leave a comment letting me know your opinion on Odell Beckham Jr. at the same time. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel. You know, we'll be live streaming tonight as well, so I can answer so many questions on Odell Beckham Jr. I'm not going to be answering any questions in this live stream, but I will be going through and I'll be giving y'all my initial reactions. Let me set up the stream really quick to subscriber only so we don't have anybody coming out here and spamming anything. And of course, if you have not already, go down there, drop that like on this live stream. Let's get this video over 1,000 likes today. So let's go through, let's talk about Odell Beckham Jr. And this is a wide receiver that the reason I was saying that we are going to be looking to sell Odell the second that he signs is at this point, I think it's safe to say that Odell Beckham Jr. is mainly just a name. It hurts me. Trust me, it really does. But going through and looking at what we have had from Odell Beckham Jr. essentially over the past 4 years now, Odell Beckham Jr. is not the same wide receiver that he was in 2014 and 2015 or 2016. This is the reason. Like, let's have a realistic stance on Odell. What has happened? The New York Giants gave him away in a trade that at the time I was screaming that the Cleveland Browns won the deal, that it was the most laughable thing ever, as everybody was. If you remember the fantasy football community, more importantly, the dynasty fantasy football community, everybody was laughing at the New York Giants, laughing at Dave Gettleman that he had no idea what he was doing. He just gave away Odell Beckham Jr. for nothing to the Cleveland Browns. So the New York Giants essentially just punt Odell off for absolutely nothing. And then after that, he fails in Cleveland. Not only does he fail in Cleveland to the point where he is then, I don't want to say cut from the team. Of course, that's unfair to say with Odell Beckham Jr. if it wasn't for just the chemistry that he had with everybody else and everything that was going on just with the locker room. Obviously, he wouldn't have been cut. It wasn't just from a talent perspective. But at the same time, we can safely say that Odell Beckham Jr. is not that stud wide receiver anymore. You're going to go through, you would not see a team cutting. Of course, a team would be willing to trade for Odell Beckham Jr. I mean, I know a lot of people, and real quick, if it looks like I'm crying, I'm just very sick right now. I'm not crying. But nonetheless, I know a lot of people coming out and saying, oh my God, the Cleveland Browns are so dumb. How are the Cleveland Browns cutting Odell Beckham Jr. the week after the trade deadline? They could have traded him last week. If they could have traded him, you really think that the Cleveland Browns, an organization that has millions and millions and millions of dollars relying on every single move that they make, you think if they could have got a second round pick for Odell Beckham Jr., you really think that they didn't make that move? And instead they were just so stupid that they had to wait a week until past the trade deadline to cut him, and then Odell Beckham Jr. cleared waivers? Like, that's not what is happening here. What's happening is teams are giving up on Odell Beckham Jr. Nobody's willing to give anything for Odell Beckham Jr. Like, going back, and it makes sense why we see this. With Odell in 2020, this is a wide receiver that, yes, he only plays 7 games. In those 7 games, 319 receiving yards. He's not giving you 50 receiving yards a game. Going back to 2019, this is the season that we really want to see with Cleveland because he was healthy the entire year. You get 15 games played from Odell Beckham Jr. in 2019. And in those 15 games played, he cracks 1,000 receiving yards, and that's it. I mean, actually, he played 16 games. He only started 15, so he played every single game. You're looking at a yards per game standpoint with Odell Beckham Jr. back in 2019. This is a wide receiver that was averaging 64 yards a game. I mean, this is just so far down back what we had in 2014 at 108 yards per game, what we had in 2015 at 96 yards per game. But let's also keep it in context. Last time we saw Odell Beckham Jr. come out and have a 100-yard performance, just a 100-yard receiving game, was back in 2018. Back in 2019. Remember what you were doing in 2019. And in that season, Odell Beckham Jr. was a mid-wide receiver 3. That's the last time Odell Beckham Jr. was startable for you in fantasy. Odell in 2020, going through the stat line, 22 receiving yards, off of 10 targets as well. He's getting targeted. 74 receiving yards, 59 receiving yards, 81, 58, 25. This season, Odell Beckham Jr. comes out 77 receiving yards, 27 receiving yards, 20, 79, 23, and 6. Odell's not a wide receiver that's going to come in and have an impact on Cooper Kupp. Maybe I move Cooper Kupp behind Devontae Adams in my rest of season rankings. Maybe. No, but Kupp is still going to be that elite level wide receiver. If this means anything, if you can go buy low on Cooper Kupp, if someone in your league is going to be worried about Odell Beckham Jr. coming in and taking target volume away from him, go through. Because also, if we look historically, these wide receivers, these veteran guys that change teams halfway through the year, historically speaking, they don't find success. Unless you're talking Amari Cooper back in 2018, give me another example of a wide receiver changing teams halfway through the season and then commanding a bunch of volume right away. It doesn't happen. Maybe Odell Beckham Jr. Let me say this, definitely. Odell will help the Los Angeles Rams. Let me put that out there, because with Odell Beckham Jr., this is going to be a wide receiver that is a great field stretching option for Los Angeles. I think he's going to be able to create space underneath for Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, because think about this team and what they were lacking from a wide receiver position. They have their stud. I don't even know if we can call him a prototypical ex-alpha wide receiver. I think in the Sean McVay offense, you don't necessarily need that level of player, but you have your stud wide receiver with Cooper Kupp. You have your flanker wide receiver with Robert Woods, and then you have your slow slot guy that didn't necessarily have a bunch of athleticism, but he can catch the ball in Van Jefferson. They had Deshaun Jackson to start the year, but with Deshaun Jackson, this is a player that moves on. So what are they lacking? They're lacking that vertical element. They're lacking the vertical element in their offense to be able to create space for the wide receivers underneath. That is a crucial wide receiver role that you have to see. They try to address that this offseason by going and getting Deshaun Jackson. And also, remember, they drafted Tutu Atwell in the second round. And I'm not sitting here saying Tutu Atwell is anything in particular, but I'm just saying that this team's been making an investment. This team has been trying to find that field stretching wide receiver to fill in on this offense. But a big thing with that role that you will have from a field stretching wide receiver is that player's never going to command a lot of targets. With Odell Beckham Jr. coming in, I would argue that he increases the efficiency of the overall offense with how defensive coordinators are now not going to be able to bring an opposing safety down. And now it's going to be, I don't want to say he's a Henry Ruggs type level player, that Henry Ruggs at the beginning part of this season, stretching the field for the players underneath in Las Vegas. That's the other example that we used to be able to give. Obviously can't give that now with Henry Ruggs, but just that player that provides the speed over the top that has to change the opponent's defense. That's going to be Odell Beckham Jr. in this offense. Odell Beckham Jr. isn't going to be a wide receiver coming in and all of a sudden just getting 20% of this team's target share. Like even going and seeing what we had with Odell Beckham Jr. I don't even want to go to what we had in Cleveland. One other thing that we can talk about with Odell Beckham Jr., and like I said, I wanted to start this video off saying how much I've loved Odell Beckham Jr. in the past, but this is also a player that has missed a considerable amount of time with some significant injuries. This is a wide receiver that's 29 years old. He's far removed from whenever you had Odell Beckham Jr. as that dominant wide receiver in New York. The last time Odell Beckham Jr. was a dominant wide receiver, the last time he had more than, say, 70 receiving yards in a game, and that's not even dominant. That's just a good wide receiver. Last time Odell Beckham Jr. was good was 2018. He had 87 receiving yards a game there. In 2018, let me look up rushing leaders in 2018 just to give everybody a decent idea of what was happening in the NFL in 2018. Because I think that you can say 2018 and it doesn't seem like that long ago, but oh my God, yes, it was a very long time ago. Last time we had Odell Beckham Jr. as a good wide receiver in the NFL. Listen to the top 10 running backs with the carries that they had this season. Okay, last time, David Johnson was the third running back in the NFL with carries. Todd Gurley was the fourth running back in the NFL with carries. Adrian Peterson was the fifth running back in the NFL with carries. Jordan Howard was the sixth. Peyton Barber was the ninth. We are so far removed from Odell Beckham Jr. being a good wide receiver based on what these NFL teams have shown us so far. There's no reason to be getting worried about Cooper Kupp here. Do not get worried about Cooper Kupp. Robert Woods, I think you have to lower him down with your expectations because, of course, Odell Beckham Jr. will be seeing more targets than what you had with Van Jefferson. And I will say that with Van Jefferson, just go ahead and cut him. Definitely. Odell Beckham Jr. is a clear sell if you can go through, package together Odell Beckham Jr. with the wide receiver 3 on your roster to get to a significant upgrade. Something I was talking about as a potential on Patreon earlier today is a roster had Hunter Renfrow and Odell Beckham Jr. And I was saying the second that Odell signs, we're going to be looking to package together with Hunter Renfrow to get an upgrade that way. Let me go over to Patreon really quick and pull up my rest of season rankings, and I can give you an idea. And over there on Patreon, I will go and I will update my rest of season rankings today for everybody over there. And also, let me give you an idea of, like, saying the perfect example, package him together with Hunter Renfrow and try to get back a wide receiver. Like, if we can get back Amari Cooper, that's a no-brainer. You can get back, I even want to say, like, if we can go get Terry McLaurin, CeeDee Lamb, that's great. If we can go get, I want to say Michael Pittman. I don't know if we can get there just yet. I really want to see what y'all are saying in the live stream tonight when we stream after the game with what you think Odell Beckham Jr.'s value currently is. My initial reaction, and I am wrong all the time, I want to put that out there. But one thing that I'm confident in is that I have a better feel of the fantasy football community of trade value than anybody else, considering that I live stream every single day, 3 to 4 hours every single night, just answering trade questions, going through and looking at rosters and talking to so many people across the fantasy football community. And at the same time, we do the same thing on Patreon all day. I didn't even see this news until about 30 minutes after it happened because I was just recording podcasts over there on Patreon. My initial reaction is I think people are going to overreact to this move. I think too many people are going to be bumping down Cooper Kupp. This is going to provide a buy low opportunity on Kupp. Go get Darrell Henderson as well, because I think Odell's presence does help the overall offense, even if Odell's not going to be able to take a lot of volume on his own right. And we should be selling Odell Beckham Jr., looking to package him together with the wide receiver 3 to get a significant upgrade of what we could have in the flex spot. But yeah, of course, thank you so much for everybody coming out to the live stream. I really have to run to the gym. I have something I got to do at 4:30, so we're already going to be a little bit late for that. You know, I will be live streaming tonight. I'll go through and update our rest of season rankings on Patreon tonight. If you have not subscribed to the channel, if you did not drop a like on this video, make sure you go down there, drop that like on the video. I'll be talking to y'all tonight after the game. Sell Odell Beckham Jr., buy low on Cooper Kupp, and go get Darrell Henderson. Thanks, everybody, for coming out, and I hope y'all have a great